Hello, everybody. Um, Welcome back to our podcast. Today, in this episode, I'm going to spend pretty much the whole episode talking about the blue hole and diving the blue hole safely. The blue hole I'm talking about, there are several in the world. I'm talking about Egypt's blue hole or the blue hole near Dahab. So, if you're going to do some research, that's the one I'm talking about. It is known to be the deadliest diving site in the world. There are a number of fatalities. Nobody kind of seems to agree on the exact number. Anywhere between 130 in the last 15 years to over at 200. Again, nobody knows exactly, but it ranges between 130 and 200, which is big enough, right? Regardless if it is 150, it's just the fact that it's at least 130 according to most estimates, it's already alarming. So, what is the blue hole? Okay, it's and again, you can do your own research, but it is a submarine sinkhole, right? It's this cave that after the ice age, when the Red Sea um, water levels rose, it kind of collapsed on top, and it created this very nice structure. It's from the top, it looks like this blue hole with a very sort of shallow opening, about 6 meters, 20 feet deep, and you can get in there, right? There's this long tunnel um, in the bottom known as the arch, but it's quite deep, right? Um, the depth is around 180 feet, 55 meters, which puts it way beyond air diving, right? Or if you're not, doing some technical diving with the proper equipment, you cannot dive as deep as 55 meters, as I expect everybody who would go there and most people who are listening to know that. Remember the first two episodes I talked about the sort of the more particular aspects of scuba diving that actually requires you to have certifications, right? At least an open water certification, which is differently than mountaineering and some other activities. So it requires technical diving, and the arch is which is the one that is at the depth of 55 meters, 180 feet, is the cause, in theory, of most fatalities. So there are two interesting stories about why it's such a deadly place. The first one is the more exciting one, which is a local legend that tells the story of this girl, and she was promised to marry, uh, you know, uh, um, another guy there in the village in Dahab by her father, and but she didn't want to, and she just threw herself in the blue hole, and she drowned. She was young, probably early 20s, maybe, or even younger. And it was many, many, years ago, hundreds of years ago. And the legend, goes like this: today, she still is in the bottom, and she attracts, right, the divers to come see her. And when they go too deep, they die. Right, they never come back. Um, the legend kind of correlates with the vast majority of the people who actually die in the blue hole because, well, to some extent, not surprisingly, right, they are male, in their 20s or 30s, right. There are the vast majority of the people who die there. So that is one story. I like to believe that was the real reason because when I dived there, I was 48. So she was not definitely not interested in me, so I had no risk. Right. The other explanation, uh, probably slightly more plausible, is that you do have the impression that the arch, which is beautiful, if you look at it from the top, right, you see the light coming through it, and you think you can reach it. So if you're not a very experienced diver and you don't know the true depth and what the arch looks like, you tend to say, yeah, it's doable. I'm gonna reach it there and and go through it and come out on the other side. Reality is very different, right? We're talking about a 55-meter depth at the very top of it, right? That's the ceiling. So it's even deeper because the whole blue hole, hole's depth is about 120 meters or nearly 400 feet. So what happens is you get narked, right? You have, again, without getting too specific on the physiology. Oh boy, sorry, that's my Brazilian accent kicking in. The physiology of diving and what happens to our bodies when we're breathing compressed air. Um, right when you get narked, you have a lot of nitrogen in your system in your body, and you don't make good decisions. To keep it very simple. So as you think you're reaching that arch, and you might, right, your ability to make decisions will deteriorate very quickly. And once you even, if assuming you get there and you have enough air to get there, the problem is not just getting, through it and coming out on the other side. It's actually very long. So by the time you go through it or you enter the arch, even at the highest part, which is at already at 55 meters, you have a problem. You cannot just swim through it, right? And then you have to go back, and by the time you go back, you run out of air. So the arch again is the main enemy apparently in most deaths, but there are other cases too, right? There is the most, I think, famous one is the death of this diver was an instructor, Yuri Lipsky, because unfortunately he died, of course, and he recorded, right, his death. So I don't recommend anybody to watch it, but it's available on the web. His body was recovered by one of the local divers there, because his mother asked him to do so, and with him came the GoPro that recorded the whole incident. And apparently, he was not going through the arch when that happened. So again, it is a dangerous place, statistically speaking, but you can do it safely. And this is what I'm going to talk about. So enough bad news. Let's talk about sort of what it takes to do it safely. So first of all, you need to find a shop. Right? I'm not gonna recommend a specific shop. There are many dive shops in Dahab that, of course, all of them dive the Blue Hole, but they also dive, the Red Sea. Not necessarily the Blue Hole. There are beautiful diving spots near that area, but be very selective in terms of which dive center you choose to do the Blue Hole dive with you. Again, if you DM me, and again, I've given my Instagram before. It should be on the podcast link. It's Leandro Dalamio, right? You can look me up on Instagram. DM me. I can tell you exactly which dive shop I used and which ones I talked to. I spoke with quite a few before making my decision. I can tell you it was the best dive shop that I've ever dived with, including the ones in the US. I was amazed by their professionalism, their equipment, their knowledge of the diving sites. It was really, really amazing. So that's the first step. Right? Select the right dive center, the right guide to go with you in the Blue Hole. Don't go alone, of course. Never dive alone. But it's even more important in this case. The currents are not strong, right? Visibility is great. But again, don't forget, it is the deadliest place to dive on Earth. That's the first step. After you've done that, and again, I can give you some direct tips if you want to. I just don't want to be super public on the podcast about it. The next step is getting there. And it is, there are two ways of getting there. Right? You can come from the north, meaning you can come through Israel, and you cross Israel into Egypt in the Taba border. And then you need to find a car. And there are many taxis, by the way, in Taba, right at the border with Israel, that will drive you there for about, it's in about an hour drive to Dahab. And you can stay in Dahab. I strongly recommend you stay there. The dives are deep. You want to rest a little bit before and definitely afterwards. You don't want to catch a flight after that. For at least 24 hours or so, depending on the kind of dives you're going to do. So you can come from the north through Israel. That's one way. It will require some logistical planning because if you're coming from the north, that means you need to fly to Tel Aviv, catch another flight. Preferably, you can take a bus or drive to this town in the southern most part of Israel called Eilat. And then from Eilat, you need to walk really, and cross the border into Egypt, which is perfectly doable. During COVID, it was a little bit more complicated, but it's straightforward. And then you get a car. The other way of doing it, and I've done it both ways, is coming via Cairo in Egypt. So you fly to Cairo. From Cairo, you take another flight to this resort town, very known, nice airport, by the way, called Sharm el Sheikh. Also has very great places to dive and nice resorts. So you fly from Cairo, Sharm el Sheikh. Sharm el Sheikh, you can get a car all the way to Dahab, and it's again about 45 minutes to an hour drive. I recommend you ask the hotel that you're staying in Dahab to arrange the car. And the reason is there will be many security checks along the way, three or four if you're coming from the south, from Sharm el Sheikh, and about three or four as well if you're coming from Taba, right? And it helps greatly. I don't speak, you know, Arab, and I could not understand what was going on. But I was stopped. My car was stopped in every checkpoint, and they were kind of asking questions: what I was doing, where I was going, which nationality I was, and in that case, by the way, I used my Brazilian nationality, not my American nationality or my Italian nationality. I happen to have three, because I just thought it was going to be easier. Um, but yeah, I think it's important, because you can pay in advance. You don't have to worry about the car that you're gonna get at the airport in Sharm el Sheikh or at the border in Taba, depending where how you decide to approach Dahab. So keep that in mind. Again, it's relatively easy if you do this via the hotel, and I think they have sort of the free passage and no questions asked policy in those checkpoints. Um, the Sinai Peninsula in that area is not it's not an area that is kind of I'm going to quote this, supported by sort of the Homeland Security U.S. Will pretty much not provide you with any um, foreign assistance. Let's put it this way: if something happens, so it's important that you get the right hotel and they have the right connections. I think it was it was I had no problems going in and getting out. Once you get there, again, you can of course then go straight to your dive shop and get ready. Now, the dive itself, there are several ways you can do it. Right? What I did was a dive that started um, in this canyon. Right? It's called Bells, and the reason is because it's kind of narrow, and you hear the tank hit the walls. Right, therefore the bells. But you come in that way to about 28, 30 meters deep, and then you come out and you enter the blue hole from the outside. I strongly recommend doing that versus just diving the blue hole itself, which you can go in. Again, as I said, the saddle, this part, the outside the blue hole itself is very shallow. You can do a short dive from there and dive only the blue hole. There's not much to see there, to be honest. Again, it's very deep, and marine life is okay. What I recommend you do it is you dive right, and you come from the outside because there's this nice, beautiful wall that actually runs 1,000 meters, 3,300 feet deep, um, And that's another point of that you need to be aware of, because you can lose perception if you're going up or down very easily. I mean, we're talking about 1,000 meters deep, and but if as you come outside from the outside, right, and then you go up and you get on the blue hole, almost from really from the outside, the experience of diving alongside that wall in the Red Sea, it was probably, if not my best diving experience, but definitely top three. And again, I've dived in many places. Amazing life, all the way along the wall. The fish was just amazing. I posted some pictures, of course, of the dive on my Instagram account. You can take a look. You see, it's just mind blowing. Plus, you have the feeling when you look down, and you can't see anything because we're talking about 1,000 meters deep. You have truly the feeling that you're flying and you're like out of space. And then as you go in, right, you keep going up, up, up gradually. And then you get into the blue hole and you dive around it so you can explore it a little bit. Again, a couple things, right? One, that wall, amazing, but you need to keep an eye on your buddy, on your guide in that case, right? Because, and keep an eye on your computer. It's very easy to either ascend without noticing, or worse, descend without noticing you are, because you have very little reference just looking at the wall. If you look at the other side, you see nothing. So computer is super important when you approaching it. Two, once you get to the blue hole, also keep an eye on your guide at all times, right? Not only it's very likely that they're going to maintain their depth, but you also guarantee that even though the blue hole is not that big, that you are going the right direction, right? You can go up and down that way, and you have everything under control. Um, those are sort of the main things, in addition to, of course, what I mentioned in episode 1 and 2, which is equipment, right? Procedures, and of course, the dive shop and the guide that you pick. One other interesting fact is my dive shop in Dahab. When I said, okay, I'm here, and they knew about it, I'm here to dive the blue hole, they said, yeah, that's great. And I said, I'm a dive master. I have, hundreds of dives, and I show my log, and they said, that's great, that's amazing, good for you. We are going to dive with you before in another spot. Very interesting, by the way. We saw a huge turtle. But we're gonna test you. We're gonna assess your diving. I know you have all these nice credentials, but to some extent, they were telling me, we don't care. If you dive the blue hole with us, you're gonna prove them, right? So they did this assessment. It was a great dive. For about 45 minutes, in terms of depth, in terms of ability to control my buoyancy, in knowing, sort of situational awareness, everything. They were assessing me before they actually took me in the afternoon to the blue hole. So again, super important if you find a guide that is doing that, not just because they want the extra money for the extra dive, but they were actually assessing me and making sure that I was for real, right? Because they don't want to have the liability or the reputation of having somebody died in a dive at the blue hole. So those are sort of the key things. Keep that in mind. The way you approach the blue hole, as I said, the caveats when you are there. I mean, there are tricks to this dive to make it safely. Right, watching your computer currents typically can be stronger on the outside. They're almost known inside of the blue hole, but visibility can be tricky at some times and can play tricks on you, thinking that that arch is closer than it actually is. Now, if you are older than 39, I'm kidding, of course, then you don't have to worry about the lady in the bottom attracting you guys, because apparently she's not interested in anybody older than 40 years or older. But if you don't believe that, do your homework. There are a couple of YouTube videos of other people successfully diving. Some very good divers. I also strongly recommend you guys watch that. Ping me if you want more details about my specific guide in dive center there. Happy to provide you the name and the context and everything. The guys were really amazing. Other than that, again, I strongly recommend you do it. I did it honestly, right? Just because it was the deadliest place on earth. Okay, I'll be fully transparent. That was the main reason I wanted to do it, and I did all the logistics to, get from the U.S., all the way to the hub, and then you get about a 30-minute drive to the Blue Hole itself. So I did it because I wanted to cross that off my list. In the end, it was even better than I expected because it was such a beautiful dive, and the marine life is just amazing. And the Red Sea is one of the last places on our Earth that is still worth, every dive. I think, unfortunately, even the Red Sea is now suffering the consequences of global warming and everything we've been doing to the environment. So, strongly recommend you guys do it safely, and have a lot of fun. Talk to you guys later.